Coming to you live, Miss Brown's #1 WHAP report team with Jake Sindorf, Dylan Riker, and our on-scene reporter, Ryan Hankels.
Today, we are going to explain how military conflicts occurred on an unprecedented global scale. During the total wars, World War I and World War II, governments used ideologies including fascism, nationalism, and communism to mobilize their states' resources, specifically their citizens and colonies, for the purpose of waging war. Communism, which was used by Joseph Stalin as the Soviet Union, helped the citizens of Soviet Russia see a better economy, although it was forced through fear tactics and secret police. Similarly, Benito Mussolini of Italy, who gained power during an economic depression, was able to mobilize their citizens with promises of a better economy and more land. Governments also used a variety of strategies, including media and intensified forms of nationalism, to mobilize the Gurkha soldiers in India, the Anzac troops in Australia, and military conscription. The Gurkha soldiers in India were strong, valiant soldiers who played a crucial part in world wars, specifically for their efforts in the British Army. Roughly 200 years ago, the British invaded Nepal. They suffered heavy casualties and made a hasty peace deal to offer to pay the Gurkhas to join their army. A soldier of the 87th Foot noted, "I never saw more steadiness or bravery exhibited in my life. Run they would not, and of death they seemed to have no fear, though their comrades were falling thick around them." The Gurkhas had a sense of nationalism for Britain in the world wars. Through pride, payments, and strong British influence, around 200,000 Gurkha soldiers fought in the world wars. However, the Gurkha veterans were not given health care, and no Gurkha was allowed to move to Britain. Britain's influence in Nepal and India was strong because they owned the colonies. Through British settlers and media, Britain was also able to spray the Gurkha soldiers to fight for them. The Anzac troops of Australia also supported the British Empire in the World Wars. The loyalty of the Australians was evident through its Commonwealth and through Labour Prime Minister Andrew Fisher, who declared Australia would support Britain to the last man and the last shilling. The Anzacs were mostly known in World War I in the Gallipoli campaign, which were led by British General William Birdwood. Both the Gurkha soldiers and the Anzac troops showed major acts of nationalism, which was mainly to the British Army, since Britain was so strongly influential in these areas. In Australia, 1 in 5 men were born in Britain, causing the troops to long return to home before going to war. Military conscription, or the draft in the U.S., also showed how governments were able to mobilize troops. During the World Wars, governments used military conscription to increase the amounts of troops. Propaganda was heavily used to influence populations in joining wars, with examples of nationalism like Uncle Sam, and the inclusion of women.
The new emergence of industrialization and imperialism in the early to the middle of the 20th century spawned new global conflicts. One of these conflicts being imperialist expansion by European powers in Japan. Besides changes in national values and practices, Japan's relations with its neighboring countries also changed after the Meiji Restoration. Japan's expansion was, similar to the other changes taking place, the result of emulation of and conflict with the Western countries. Historically, many wars have been fought over the possession or control of vital resources: water, gold, silver, diamonds, petroleum, and so on. Resource conflict was less prominent during the Cold War period, when ideological disputes prevailed, but was more prominent in the pre-Cold War era. Systems such as the 5-year plans, which was meant to increase electricity and heavy industry output by over 300%, while what seemed contradictory, during the Depression, world trade had dropped by over 62% due to a concept called isolationism. Throughout the 20th century, extreme national movements were carried out through ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing was the attempt to get rid of members of an unwanted ethnic group. The Turkish massacre of Armenians during World War I, the Nazis committing the Holocaust in the late 30s and 40s, and the forced displacement and mass killings carried out in the former Yugoslavia and the African country of Rwanda during the 1990s, all being examples of this. Great power rivalries were an important global conflict which contributed to many wars in the 20th century. The Anglo-German naval arms race of the early 20th century preceded and was one of the several intertwined causes for the First World War. There were also other naval buildups in several other countries which were emerging as great powers, such as the United States and Japan, and in South America. The US and Russia is an obvious example, being the two main contenders of the Cold War and continuing the world's arms race of the 20th century. The Great Depression of the 1930s was the most momentous economic event of the 20th century. It was a proximate cause of World War II, having fed the Nazis' rise in Germany. It inspired a new American welfare system as a response to mass misery. Everywhere it refuted unsupervised capitalism. During a 3-year period in the 30s, many major economies dropped by over 25%, and a quarter of the adult male population was actually thrown out of work. The economic turmoil created hardships in every corner of the globe.
Now to our field reporter, Ryan Hankels, to give us an update on how the US and the Soviet Union became superpowers through the Cold War.
Thanks, Jake. First of all, the US was able to pull itself out of the Depression because of World War I, which helped them recover and maintain a strong economy after the war, while other countries struggled. Also, Stalin brought the Soviet Union to power through his 5 years plans, which focused on industrialism and rapid growth. But he left out improvements to agriculture and consumer goods. Stalin was also able to implement these changes through terror and the NKVD, or the secret police. Then, after the Soviet Union recognized Germans and Japanese were no longer a threat, they jumped into competing for global domination. This worried America, the other superpower, because the Soviet Union's use of communism were seen as a large risk factor for America. This resulted in a global conflict known as the Cold War. Back to you.
Hey man, that storm's getting pretty bad.
The Cold War was produced new military lines, including NATO and the Warsaw Pacts, and they prompted the proxy wars in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Back to you, Ryan.
Thanks again, guys! As you know, the two superpowers created tension between smaller countries. They began to use smaller, less powerful countries to support them, tempting them with financial aid and weaponry. Along with the retaliation that anti-communist countries had against the spread of communism was the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. NATO, along with its opposite alliance, the Warsaw Pact, whose members supported all things communist, divide European tension into communist and capitalist countries, creating a large rivalry.
Back to Ryan with the dissolution of the Soviet Union and how it effectively ended the Cold War.
Thanks, guys! After the parting of the 11 Soviet republics from the Soviet Union and a great number of radical reforms, the Soviet Union began to fall. Seeing the fall of his nation, the Soviet president, Mikhail Gorbachev, resigned, thus ending the Cold War and its conflict.
Which they were led by British General William Birdwood. Both
Why did you do?
Isn't that after World War II?
I don't know.
War, the US was able to pull itself
Through the comrades were falling thick around them. I messed that up.
Just started recording.
Were you recording that? You were. That's a public threat though, I could get in trouble.
The new emergence of industrialized...
Stalin brought the...
General William Birdwood. Both the Gurkha soldiers... It does. Smells like Lucky Charms.
This just in.
This smells like Lucky Charms.
movements were carried out through ethnic cleansing.
left out other improvements such as agriculture and consumer goods. Stalin was also able to implement these changes through the secret police or the NKVD.
Birdwood, 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 Birdwood. Nothing wrong with Birdwood. Not funny.
Thanks, Jake. First of all, the US was able to pull itself out of the Depression because of World War II, which helped them recover and maintain a strong economy after the war, while other countries struggled. Stalin brought the Soviet Union to power through his 5 years plans, which focused on industrialism and rapid growth. But he also...
It's done. Yes, Mr. Frodo. It's over now.